Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, and that was Finster. There we go. Yes, making a very brief appearance. I actually have a little thing here now. Let's see that they can jump up in, and I can entice them with a snack or two, and they'll just hop right up on the desk. So maybe we'll be seeing some more of them. I wanted to talk to you about just a very interesting sort of intellectual musical topic, and that's changing images of the East in Western music. Because nowadays, whenever you talk about Orientalism or Western music that's evocative of the East, it's usually cloaked in some sort of very annoying politically correct framework. It's cultural imperialism or cultural appropriation or naughty things that people are doing with music of the East. But the fact of the matter is the relationship between East and West has been going on as long as there's been an East and a West. And in cultural terms, there's some fascinating things that we can glean from it. And one of them actually became the topic of my second master's thesis when I was at Stanford University, which was changing images of the West as reflected in music evoking the East. I know that sounds very it's interesting. Trust me. Let me give you an example. Let's just talk about concrete examples. What my point was that because I was a historian and my period was sort of fin de siècle, 19th, 20th century. That was sort of my specialty. And my first master's thesis was about the Der Fall Hindemith, the Hindemith affair with Hitler and Fort Wengler. And, it had Nazis, it had music. I mean, there was nothing not to love. But this one was a little different. We decided to do France. I decided to do France because one of the things that I had noticed was that there was a shift between the healthy, absolutely imperialist view of the East in the mid-19th century to a very, very different view of the interaction between East and West by the turn of the 20th century. And the two sort of iconic works that I used to embody that shift in that paradigm shift, views of how Western culture viewed itself. Because remember, all of this is about how Western culture views itself. It's a product of Western culture. I mean, intentionally or not, it reflects its time. So the two works in question were Delibes Lakme and Ravel's Chanson Madagascar, the Madagascar songs, which are wonderful. And if you don't know them, you should really give them a listen. Anyway, Lakme is a typical East meets West story, or West meets East, with the East being depicted as a somewhat sensual, seductive, decadent kind of, not evil, but not immoral. Let's put it that way. Culture or civilization, and the West being noble and virtuous and Christian and, all of those theoretically good qualities. And in Lakme, the story is, it's actually almost the same as what is it? Roland, the knight, the crusader and Armida, that sort of stuff. You have, Lakme, who's the sexy daughter of the high priest or whatever the heck she is. And she runs around singing the flower song and doing British Airways commercials. And you have the hunky Western, military guy, and they're in love. Of course, they're in love, which is doomed. It's totally doomed because at some point his friends persuade him that he must return to his duty as an officer and a soldier and give up a life of hedonistic pleasure and decadence and sex and all those naughty bits. And he does, of course, he does, because he's the paragon of virtue. As a friend of mine once said, how many sides has a paragon? Anyway, he's a paragon of virtue. And so he dumps her and she kills herself by, taking poison from the leaves of the Monkahunka tree or something like that. I don't know. It's a beautiful opera. Absolutely, she does. The bell song, it's gorgeous. absolutely gorgeous. And it's wonderful. And it's wonderful because the Eastern setting allowed composers to culturally appropriate all kinds of interesting scales and harmonies and luscious, orchestral colors and all that stuff. So, to create a setting. I don't consider that cultural appropriation. I consider that creating a setting. That's what composers are supposed to do, right? I mean, really, it's very funny now when we listen to Baroque music, for example, and a lot of Baroque music is set in Eastern settings. I mean, there's all kinds of, they're biblical, subjects or Greek mythology or all that stuff. But the music is all just plain Baroque music. There isn't a shred of exoticism in it. I mean, Handel was really, was really a big deal when Handel wrote Julius Caesar, and he used like a lute. He did something to create some sort of local color in his scores. Handel was great that way. But most composers, they just wrote the standard stuff, da capo arias and recitatives. It didn't matter where they stuck it. The plots were all the same anyway. But, in the 19th century, there was more cultural exchange between the two, and for many aesthetic reasons, composers just searched for a more colorful or realistic setting, and they used whatever they could get their hands on to create a certain level of exoticism. Now, there is a difference between something like Lakme, which actually deals with the East-West clash, and pieces that are straight out just, Orientalist, like Aida, for example, which all the characters are from the same place. It's not about a contrast in value or a moral sort of judgment. So Lakme is sort of your typical iconic 19th century example of what happens when, East meets West. But by the turn of the 20th century, the view of our own civilization had changed. It had become, people started looking at it somewhat askance. And the ascancitude was a result, some people would say, of cultural decadence, like late romantic decadence, starting with Wagner, who was, the ultimate late romantic decadent guy. But Mahler and Strauss, big, huge orchestras and grandiosity and the exhaustion, which you might call, of the old European system of politics. That is, the clash between the rise of nation states and dynastic aristocracy. And, everything was kind of looking frayed and people were nervous. And it was a very interesting period for that reason, historically. And that's reflected in musical composition. And the work in question, Ravel's Chanson Maracas, is particularly potent as an example of that, because it straight out makes its point with the song Awa. It's a scream, Awa, Awa, méfiez-vous des blancs habitants de village, or whatever it was. It's hey, don't trust the white people at the coasts. They came, they promised friendship, and they've destroyed everything, and they're lousy, and they're untrustworthy, and they're creepy, and they're despicable. And, the whole Madagascar, Asian view in Ravel's world is that of an unsullied, untouched, noble, savage paradise kind of place, in which Western culture is only a corrupting influence. And that is a very, very, very different thing than we saw only a couple generations before in pieces like Lakme. And there's more than the Ravel. Just look at Madame Butterfly. Who are the good guys and who are the bad guys, right? Butterfly is unquestionably the good guy. She's married. She's married to a Westerner, to Pinkerton, and Pinkerton is a total jerk. He shows up with his Western wife to take away her baby. If there's anything more cruel and degenerate and revolting than the character of Pinkerton in opera, it's probably hard to nail it down. Now, of course, this was not a universal trend. There was still good old-fashioned, perhaps culturally appropriative influences or imperialistic influences. But I don't really care about those. Frankly, the point is that there is a shift. There's a shift in the way that artists in the West viewed themselves and viewed Western culture. And so when people are talking about ideas like imperialism, big words, oh, imperialism, oh, cultural appropriation, big words, blah, 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 blah. You have to define your terms. You have to be specific as to who, where, when, and, what they're saying. Because the whole idea of using Eastern elements in your Western music could be very, very different depending on what you were trying to say and how you were trying to say it. It's impossible to make these grandiose cultural generalizations about the influence of Western culture on Eastern culture, or the efforts of Western culture to dominate Eastern culture and all of that stuff. If you actually look at the works and you look at how the composers were working, nothing could have been further from their minds. Nothing at all. There are pieces that attempt to make a point about, Western culture. One of the most famous was Amy Beach's Irish Symphony, whatever that thing is called. It's an Irish Symphony, Scottish Symphony, I don't know, the Amy Beach Symphony, where what she was trying to prove, she wrote it in response to Dvorak's New World Symphony, where Dvorak had offered the idea that true American music was going to be based on African American and indigenous peoples' music. And that caused an uproar in cultural circles, which were very proud of their Western heritage. And so Beach wrote a symphony where she was going to use those tunes and prove that those tunes were actually the ones that were the more, legitimate basis for Western music. Well, we all know how well that turned out, don't we? There was, but it wasn't done in a hostile way. It was a debate, an artistic debate, a legitimate debate that was going on in the very period in question. And so one of the things that I find so distressing about the current politically correct attitude and the cancel culture with respect to so much Western music is this complete lack of historical foundation for it. All they know, as often as not, is that there were people, they may have been bigots, they may have been they were of their time. And you never judge people in hindsight if they're of their time. They may have been horrible of their time, but they were of their time, and they had common beliefs that were characteristic of the period. And they created works which reflected a certain view of themselves, of their own culture, and of the other cultures that they were using for the purpose of reflecting, shining a light back on themselves. It's very, very much more complicated than just saying, the fact that they're using this Eastern music prevents real Eastern music from being appreciated, or it does something terrible in an imperialist way. That wasn't the point. That wasn't the point of Lakme, really. The point of Lakme was not to celebrate the virtues of Western civilization, particularly, although that may have been an unspoken subtext to much of the art of the time. It was to tell a wonderful love story. A story between, and then these clash of culture love stories are fabulous. Opera is full of them. There's what Spontini, he did what, Fernand Cortez or Vasco da Gama or one of those things. There's all these East meets West or exotic meets West, because South America, the Incas, the Mayans, the ancient civilizations, they're all just as liable to be. They're all treated the same, basically, right? Because the West was the West and everything else was out there. It was other. So it was West versus other. And in the West versus other conflict, you had to have a love triangle, or love of some kind. And, they're love stories. And they're love stories where, they're always going to end badly. And, they don't end badly. Sometimes they end badly because of the other culture. Sometimes they end badly because of Western culture. But over the course of the 19th century, the view of Western culture shifted. And that is a very, very interesting phenomenon to examine. And there are many other examples that I could cite on both sides of the issue that demonstrate just how we can musically hear these shifting attitudes towards Western culture as reflected in music that evokes the East, or the outside. And it's a very, very interesting topic. And I just wanted to bring it up and throw it out there and let you think about it, because, there is so much more nuance and so much more richness of ideas and of course musical enjoyment to be gotten from not taking an absolute position about these things, but rather looking at what really happened and being accurate as to the historical realities of the times in question. Anyway, that's just something I wanted to bring up. I just thought you might find it interesting, and it would give you something to think about when you listen to music that has something to do with Eastern culture reinterpreted through Western eyes. Musical cultures, anyway. And one of you had asked me for a list of Eastern stuff, East Orientalist music and in Western music, and I have one, so we'll do that talk separately, and I'll have a wonderful time going through some very, very interesting pieces of music. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks so much for joining me. Take care.